Great, thanks Natalie. Hi everyone, welcome to the April Twin Ports Climate Conversations. My name is Hillary Sorensen. I'm a climate biologist with the 1854 Treaty Authority. We're an intertribal natural resources agency governed by Boyce Fort and Grand Portage, located in Duluth. And today I just wanted to welcome you all and introduce our three speakers. So today we're going to be hearing about the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts, their 2021 assessment report. So first we'll hear from Natalie Chin, who is the Climate and Tourism Outreach Specialist with Wisconsin Sea Grant. She's going to provide an overview of the 2021 assessment report, also highlighting its new emphasis on climate justice and storytelling. Next, we'll hear from Adam Bechle, who is the Coastal Engineering Outreach Specialist with Wisconsin Sea Grant. And Adam will discuss what the report says about potential impacts to coastal resources and the Great Lakes. And then finally, we'll hear from Anna Haines, who is the Professor and Director of the Center for Land Use Education at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And Anna is going to talk about how we can use the report's findings to improve community sustainability. And then following these three presentations, we'll have time for some Q&A. So if you do have questions, feel free to enter those anytime in the Q&A box on the lower part of your Zoom panel. Before I pass things over to Natalie, I just want to thank all of the organizers that participate in Twin Ports Climate Conversation planning. Those include Minnesota Sea Grant, Wisconsin Sea Grant, the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, the 1854 Treaty Authority, and Minnesota's Lake Superior Coastal Program at Minnesota DNR and NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. The mission of these conversations is to aid in improving climate communication skills for all different practitioners throughout the region, to improve climate change related data collection and sharing, to motivate and support community-based adaptation, and to increase climate change conversations in more sectors to broaden the impact. We do post previous recordings of previous climate conversations on the Minnesota Sea Grant website, and a link is going to be posted in the chat right now. So do feel free to visit those and see what sorts of things we featured in the past. Again, please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box. And then just a quick reminder that this webinar will be recorded and posted on the Minnesota Sea Grant webpage. And then following the Q&A, we'll do some brief closing and set things up for the next conversation. So with that, I'll pass things over to Natalie. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Hillary. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. If you've been at previous TPCs, you'll recognize me as a member of the planning team for TPCC. I also co-chair the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impact, or WICCI's Tourism and Outdoor Recreation Working Group, which I've talked about at a previous event. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of WICCI's new assessment report and then turn it over to Adam and Anna, who will share more about the working groups that they lead and highlight findings that are relevant for our region. Okay, so for anyone who isn't familiar with WICCI yet, its mission is to generate and share information that can foster solutions to climate change in Wisconsin, including by developing scientific understanding of climate change impacts, identifying vulnerabilities to climate change and climatic variability in the state, and also enable successful problem solving through decision support. And WICCI really exists at the intersection of science and action, in particular the adaptation space, and engages with diverse stakeholders across the region, which includes citizens, private and public decision makers, and scientists through its diverse collaborative network. So WICCI is made up of over a dozen different working groups, which can be kind of broadly grouped under some these categories of air, water, land, and people. There's also a new geospatial group that intersects with all of the different working groups. And today, as we mentioned, we'll hear from chairs of the Coastal Resilience Working Group and Community Sustainability Working Group, but you can find more information about all the working groups on the WICCI website, about the different activities that they're doing, who their members are, et cetera. There's a lot of really great information there. So Wiki was originally formed in the fall of 2007 by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. And it did publish its first assessment report in 2011, which provided a comprehensive overview of how climate change will impact Wisconsin. And then in 2019, Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers issued an executive order that tasks the Wisconsin DNR to work with Wiki to update the 2011 report and provide information to a newly formed governor's task force on climate change. And so this new assessment report was released earlier this year on February 10th, which is really exciting. And with this new assessment report, Wiki leadership decided to make some important changes to how it's formatted and released. For one, it's only being released in electric format to make it easier to disseminate and also update over time. And someone actually left a copy of the 2011 report outside my office the other day, and it's definitely bulkier and more difficult to manage. So I think that was a decision that was made to really help spread it across the state and make it easier for folks to engage with the report. The report also really tries to utilize narratives to improve scientific communication, and this includes by including interviews with folks across the state who can talk about different impacts that they're seeing and how they're adapting already to climate change. And these are really led by the new Wiki science writer who was hired during this process to help facilitate, really incorporating stories a little bit more into the content that makes the overall report not only more accessible, but also relatable for folks. And I'll share a little bit more about those narratives in a minute. There's also a much greater emphasis in this report on climate justice, which comes across in the narratives, but also other ways, including how we're incorporating the perspectives of different stakeholders and impacts to different communities that maybe weren't as covered as much in the original assessment report. Let's see. So the target audience for this report is still decision makers, which not only includes folks in government, but also those who are making natural resource management decisions and other kinds of decisions. With the tourism and outdoor recreation work, we are considering business owners and folks who run events and that kind of thing. So really trying to provide information that is easily understandable and easily accessible to many different types of decision makers. The report also contains information about climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies, which are highlighted as potential climate change solutions in this new report. So this is just a little bit more detail about what you'll find if you go to the website and look at the reports. You can either download a copy of the assessment report from the website or just navigate it and read it online. And so you'll find different chapters that are broken up roughly in the same categories as the categories that I shared earlier with air, land, water, and people. But then there's also a built-in environment chapter that focuses on infrastructure and coastal resilience. And then with each of these chapters, there's also a spotlight on a particular story that helps bring together some of the major themes around the chapter and also highlights, again, some of these narratives and impacts that are being seen that are directly relevant to what the chapter is talking about. So that's just a little bit more detail about kind of how the report's broken up and what you'll find if you visit the website. And again, this is kind of what it looks like. For example, with this agriculture section, there's kind of a high level synthesis of the findings of the working group. And again, like really focusing on kind of the key messages and the key outcomes and top level information that would be most interesting and relevant to folks who are interested in this topic area. And then there are these sidebars that are linked to the interviews and the stories that are related to the topic area. So these links are, hyperlinks. So if you go to the report and click on them, it'll take you right to the interview or the story that it's the quotes pulled from. So easy to navigate, easy to engage with, and get the any and all information that you're hoping to find with the report. And then for each section, again, there's a section about solutions. So again, these are the climate adaptation and mitigation strategies that the working group is kind of proposing as potential solutions in this particular area related to agriculture. And they do include different practices, different policy recommendations, et cetera, anything that's relevant to kind of dealing with the impacts of climate change in this area. And then there's also links in the report to that particular working group and the work that they're doing. So if you go to their page, you'll find much more information about what the working group is doing and all of the additional information that kind of went into this broader contribution to the assessment report. It also includes information about kind of upcoming events and future work that the working group is considering. So lots of great information, but it's also easy to navigate again and engage with the report. And then I just wanted to show what the story spotlight looks like. So if you go to the report and are looking for the story spotlight in particular, this one's on northern Wisconsin, so it's directly relevant to our region. You can visit here and again see relevant interviews and a synthesis of kind of what's being seen from the larger narratives around climate change in a really just nice, easy to engage with way. And then if you're interested just in kind of looking at the stories, the climate change stories, there's an additional sub-page on the website where you can just look at the stories in particular. And I took a screenshot of this one because it does highlight quite a few stories from northern Wisconsin and our region that are relevant. So they're really great. There's a ton of great content that's come out with the new assessment report and these stories and climate change information. So I encourage anyone who's interested to visit the website and do to look for the information that is most interesting to you. So yeah, so that's just a quick overview of the report. I want to turn it over and give most of our time to Adam and Anna and questions, but hopefully that was helpful just to help kind of give a broader context for what we're talking about today. So thanks.
So Adam, whenever you're ready, feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you. So my name is Adam Bechle. I am the Coastal Engineering Outreach Specialist with Wisconsin Sea Grant, and I am a co-chair of our Great Lakes Coastal Resilience Working Group. And so as Natalie alluded to, the Coastal Resilience Working Group has a focus on sort of our built environment on the coast and our human interactions with the coast. As many of you can probably attest to, the Great Lakes are a wonderful natural resource for both Wisconsin and Minnesota. They're kind of where we live. It's where we recreate, find a place of sense of beat place and culture, as well as being an important economic driver for the region. The Twin Ports being a major one for both states. Being on the Great Lakes coast does not come without sort of some hazards or some risks. We've seen in recent years with record high water levels and being preceded by record low water levels, some of those multiple faces of the Great Lakes, coastal flooding, coastal erosion, and then when we don't have enough water, limiting navigation and limiting that economic driver to some extent. And so that was sort of the focus of our work group. The overall theme of, or one of the overall themes of the Wiki report is, we're experiencing a warmer and wetter climate. And we wanted to drill into what does that actually mean for our Great Lakes coasts. So before I jump into that, I'd like to acknowledge the members of this Coastal Resilience Work Group, my co-chair, David Hart at Wisconsin Sea Grant, and then members of the work group from Wisconsin DNR, the Coastal Management Program, UW-Madison College of Engineering and Geosciences, Ozaukee County, USGS, and the Association of State Floodplain Managers. So what are some of the important stressors on our Great Lakes coasts? A major one being wave energy. So waves when they hit the coast, are the things that sort of expend energy on our coastlines and cause erosion or push water up and it can cause flooding. And so that is typically greatest during our fall and winter seasons when our large storms come across the Great Lakes. Another important variable or stressor is ice cover. So when we do have ice cover on the lakes, that can act as a buffer on our coasts, as well as leaving less open water during that stormy season for large waves to develop. Sort of a flip side of ice cover is when the lakes are too ice covered, shipping shuts down for a few months in the winter and then resumes back up right around now when we can sort of break that ice and get back on the water. And then a biggie in the Great Lakes is the water levels. That really sort of exacerbates a lot of these hazards. So as we saw in recent years with high water levels, those waves can reach higher on the shoreline and start to cause erosion that threatens homes and businesses and infrastructure and can flood our low-lying areas. When we have higher water levels, that can generally be better for shipping because we can carry more cargo in our ships without having to worry about water depth. Of course, if water gets too high, there are instances where docking facilities are inundated, and that can be problematic at that far end of the extreme. On the other hand, too low of water levels can cause problems with navigation. There may not be enough water depth for recreational boats. Ships have to carry less cargo, maybe need for increased dredging. However, when we think of the coastline with lower water levels, we might have wider beaches and erosion is much less of a threat. So these are sort of the three main variables we looked at in our report and tried to tease out what climate change was going to do and what those impacts would be. So starting with what I call the biggie is water levels. And so this is historic water levels for both Lake Superior and Lake Michigan Huron from 1918 to 2021. And so you can see over time, it's constant change. We have extreme highs and extreme lows. The red line in the middle here is the long-term average water level. And the lakes don't like to sit at that long-term average water level. They fluctuate around it. So in the early 2000s, we had a period of prolonged low water levels, and then that was followed by a period of record high water levels. And so this can be very challenging to prepare for and adapt to those two extremes. Going forward, what do water levels sort of project as? Well, to understand that, we kind of have to understand what the water balance is of water entering and leaving the lakes. As you recall, I said that one of the main themes of the WICCI report is a warmer and wetter climate. So what does that mean for water levels? Well, think about how water gets into and out of the Great Lakes. One is precipitation directly on the lakes, runoff from the landscape into the lakes, but then water also leaves in pretty significant quantities from the lake surface through evaporation. We also have flow through the channels that connect the lakes. In Lake Superior, we have flow out to Lake Michigan Huron through the St. Mary's River. And then we do have diversions of water into and out of the system. Lake Superior has two diversions of water, are sort of anthropogenic diversions into the system, Long Loch and Okogie diversions into Lake Superior. But by and large, the kind of supply of water into the Great Lakes is controlled by these first three variables: precipitation, runoff, and evaporation. That's sort of how nature really impacts how much water is in our lakes. And that, when we kind of add those things together, that's called net basin supply. So the supply of water from the environment into our lakes. So precipitation plus runoff minus how much water is evaporating out. So again, warmer and wetter climate. So wetter climate, we'll expect to see more precipitation, more runoff from that increased precipitation. But in a warmer climate, also more evaporation. So we have more water coming in and more water leaving. And so that kind of, at this point, there's some uncertainty about, is there going to be a clear winter? There may be some signs that we might be ticking up a little bit in supply of water, leading to sort of a long-term increase in water levels, but still a lot of uncertainty there. But one thing that we sort of are seeing is we're intensifying the inputs and the outputs, which probably will lead to more extremes in the future. Higher highs possibly, lower lows, maybe more rapid changes. So really, the story on climate change and Great Lakes water levels is to prepare for, keep continuing to prepare for both extremes and possibly more extremes in water levels. Moving on to ice cover, in our warming climate, we have observed decreasing ice cover on the Great Lakes and expect that to continue. So here we have this graph of annual maximum ice cover for Lake Superior from the 1970s to present. And you can see a lot more periods of low ice years once we get into the 21st century. And just, visually, what does that look like? So we have here a 2014 satellite image of Lake Superior. That was a pretty high ice cover year. And then 2017, a pretty low ice cover year. So that's a pretty clear trend in a warming climate that we expect to see less ice cover on our lakes. So that does impact how much wave energy we're anticipating seeing. So this was a study done in the Apostle Islands on Lake Superior, looked at wave climatology. So running a model of waves in that area of Lake Superior for 35 years and looking at sort of trends. And I pulled a quote that sort of has the most relevant piece about climate change as it relates to wave energy, comparing trends in ice cover duration and trends in significant wave height, or just say wave height. There's an obvious negative correlation, suggesting that loss of ice cover is the dominant mechanism for an increasing wave climate in the Apostle Islands. So there was sort of an observed increasing wave climate in the Apostle Islands and an observed decreasing ice climate. And so those are very, very correlated, and with less ice cover sort of protecting the water in the middle of winter, we expect to see those strong storms causing more wave energy reaching the coast. So kind of to summarize, climate change impacts on the Great Lakes coast. Water levels, we still uncertain if we're going to see a trend up or down, but we do continue to expect to see those highs and lows, possibly higher highs and lower lows. Ice cover, pretty clear that we're going to see decreasing ice cover, and then that will correspond with increasing wave energy being able to reach the coast, particularly during those strong winter storms. So what does that mean in terms of impacts on our Great Lakes coasts and infrastructure? Well, continuing to see high and low water levels with an increase in wave energy. These think we'll see an increase in coastal flooding, potential increase in coastal infrastructure damage and coastal erosion. So more waves, wave energy reaching the coast, causing those hazards. Interesting question is, what will that do for shipping? So a couple things going on here. Continuing to see high and low water levels kind of have that positive and negative effect. We keep seeing extreme low water levels. We're going to have those periods where cargo has to be reduced, dredging has to be increased. But declining ice cover could open the shipping season up longer. And so that is also another one of those uncertain impacts on shipping. There's an active study at UW Superior right now. What are all those impacts? If we have a longer shipping season, is cargo going to increase, or do we just have less ships running? Or is there more cargo going to be shifted to shipping since the season's longer? Those are sort of open questions that we're trying to figure out right now. So that's why I kind of put, up, down. It's not quite clear what that's going to mean, but there definitely will be some changes. So how do we sort of adapt to these changes? There's a lot of strategies out there. I'm just going to list a couple conceptual ones that we highlighted in our report. Main one being considering function at all lake levels. So if we're going to see highs and lows continuing, we can't just respond to high lake levels and not think about low lake levels or vice versa. Assessing the vulnerability of our critical assets. If we do expect to see higher lake levels, increased wave energy, we have to sort of figure out what's critical to protect and how do we plan for that now before some of that is realized. Coordinating action along the coast, so we're talking with each other and sharing best practices, what we're doing is going to be important. So in Lake Superior, there's a group talking about these coastal resilience issues called Coastal Hazards of Superior. Meet quarterly and talk about these issues, specifically coastal hazards and a whole sort of range of things that relate to them is a good start to that. Locating things we care about, like homes away from eroding and flooding shorelines. This is just an example here of a house in Sheboygan County on Lake Michigan. Got close to an eroding bluff. And rather than try and protect this, the most cost-effective solution was to pick that house up and move it back away from the coast. And you can kind of see this line of different colored grass here. The highway actually also was relocated further away from the coast. And then kind of a final strategy is working with natural processes to protect the coast. This is sort of an emerging area in the Great Lakes. And there's two examples that I show down here from the Lake Superior area. One is Grand Marais, where sort of this rock has been incorporated into protecting the shoreline, but a significant amount of vegetation, they kind of work together to protect the coast here. And then on the Allouez Bay side of Wisconsin Point, kind of a similar concept, a rock sill and a planted marsh providing protection to the road out there in Wisconsin Point. If you'd like to learn more about adaptation strategies, we have a couple of nice glossy guidebooks called Adapting to a Changing Coast, one for property owners and one for coastal communities. They say Lake Michigan and southeastern Wisconsin, but they're pretty broadly applicable. And then I'd just like to say thanks for your attention and again, acknowledge all of the collaborators on the Coastal Resilience Working Group report.
Okay, can you see my slide and hear me? Okay, okay, good. And I'm gonna move all of you. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for having me today. Again, I'm Anna Haines, and I'm a professor and land use extension specialist at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And I'm the director of the Center for Land Use Education, which is extension funded. At CLU, we work closely with local governments of all sizes, towns, cities, villages, and counties to help them make better decisions with regards to land use and development. Right now, I am spending quite a bit of time with WICCI's Community Sustainability Working Group, and I work with Extension's Climate Leadership Team, and we've been working on a community resilience menu to aid local governments with resources. So today I'm going to give you a flyover of the community sustainability chapter. Just like the Natalie and Adam presented, there's far too much to present. So I encourage you to pick up the report and find things that interest you and your community. And let's see if, there, I think it moved. So we know Wisconsin's climate is changing. It is becoming both warmer and wetter. We know that winters are becoming warmer, which in turn is affecting many industries and communities with a shortened season of snow and the unpredictability of this year, quite a long winter. Summer is also getting much warmer with more and more days over 90 degrees. We also know that Wisconsin is getting more precipitation with extreme events. So the goal of the WICCI Community Sustainability Working Group is to support communities in the process of finding solutions to climate change. That means we work to find experts, information, and technologies that are going to help local governments save time and money to make their governments and communities more resilient. Often those local governments are the ones dealing with the immediate impacts when there is an extreme event. And so they are also helping their community recover and shape how they are moving forward and minimizing future impacts. Going forward, okay. I thought it was important for all of you to know who has been supporting this work. So community sustainability was represented in the first WICCI report, but we have an entirely new team who has been working on this second piece. We have strived to ensure that the membership has local governments represented. There's planners, economic development professionals, elected officials, and local utility experts. as well as several associations. For example, Oneida Nation, the PSC, Department of Administration, WICCI, and a prominent legal firm that works with local governments are part of our group. So I mentioned that that community sustainability working group is focused on supporting communities and finding solutions to climate change so that they can be more resilient and sustainable. I know that we often talk about sustainability as a three-legged stool, or maybe intersecting circles, right? A Venn diagram. However, the illustration that you see on the slide is how I personally like to think about it, and it's called the nested egg model. It helps to visualize that the economy is a subset or wholly dependent on society. So society makes the rules for how our economies work and function, and that our society is also completely dependent on the environment or our natural resource base. So this kind of illustration and what it means is really informing how the Community Sustainability Working Group is viewing how we move forward. All right, so the report itself does a solid job of clearly documenting what local governments are experiencing and what is keeping elected officials and decision makers up at night. We not only go into the abundant information around ever increasingly strong weather patterns, but how that is manifesting on the landscape. I'm sure this picture is familiar to many of you. Northern Wisconsin has experienced quite a bit of some extreme events over the past several years. In 2016 and 2018, Northern Wisconsin and the nearby parts of Minnesota experienced some very extreme precipitation events that damaged many roads and structures. The 2016 event resulted in over $38 million in damage. The challenge presented by these extreme events is figuring out how to make roads and other infrastructure more resilient. There's been some work on right-sizing and shaping culverts, for example. Other work could include more green infrastructure within communities, more wetland restoration, and making sure buildings are located outside floodplains. The new federal infrastructure funds could be used to make local infrastructure more resilient to these extreme events. In the report, we also acknowledge that climate change impacts everyone, and that is not the whole story. We want to amplify the message that not everyone is impacted equally. As we consider future actions, we need to concurrently build solutions that support communities of color, First Nations, and those that live in poverty. Another finding is that special attention must be paid to the health impacts of climate change within our communities. There are, of course, the emergency responses that need to happen with flooding, fires, or other extreme weather events. But then there are the pressures that arise and that inflict chronic health issues like diseases from insects, asthma, exposure to bacteria, and molds after flooding. We cannot dismiss the impact of high heat on wellness, both emotional and physical, of our communities, and how so many of these situations are worse in communities that do not have coping mechanisms or resources like air conditioning, air filtering, or solutions for when someone's home is in a low-lying area that is vulnerable to flooding. So what are communities concerned about? The infrastructure working group, so a completely different group of WICCI, asked managers, elected officials, planners, consultants, and others who work with local governments to participate in a survey in 2020. And this chart shows you the respondents' concerns. The answers that receive the most concern are related to climate change. And the ones of most concern is that orangey brown colors. You can also tell when the survey was conducted because, of course, the pandemic is sitting there at number 3. So what, again, oops, this isn't moving forward. Okay, another way to look at this question is by who answered and how they answered. So I've just highlighted planners. I do a lot of planning work and I speak to a lot of planners. So this just jumped out to me. Planners in those other categories tend to have more concern over climate related issues than some of the other respondents. Impacts from seasonal and extreme storms, urban flooding, and impacts on disadvantaged populations popped out. And you can see that again in that kind of orangey brown color. As I said, I am part of Extension, and several years ago, our team put together a survey that we sent to local governments. At least one question focused on challenges that local governments face in striving to create quality, livable places that are both resilient and sustainable. 3 key challenges among many that were identified were funding, so the ability to fund projects. 2, staffing, so the ability to hire more staff and identify and hire the right staff. I think right now is particularly challenging because of so much economic churn going on. I know lots of people are coming and going from jobs. And 3, finding the right expertise to help a local government move beyond the silos, business as usual, and addressing the funding and staffing challenges. So the big question is, how can we, so Sea Grant, Extension, WICCI, work to assist local governments in making more resilient communities? All right, so again, I'm a planner, so I always start with planning. So it's critical to moving forward. We kind of need to know where we want to be before we can just start implementing. And so I just find that this is a really critical thing to create sort of a guidebook on how to move forward. The other piece of this is we need to make sure that lots of people are involved in this conversation, and that can include local government staff who often do the heavy lifting of actually implementing what we've all identified as important. And so staff do need to be on board and involved. I'll give you a quick example. I serve on our Water and Sewer Commission in my community, and staff are always innovative and creative in solving all sorts of issues. So many years ago, the sewer treatment plant started to create its own heat and energy through burning methane. The idea came from staff and was supported by the board and others. And this reduced our greenhouse gas emissions footprint and reduced our energy bill as well. So we need to dig in on understanding the unique situations across our state. And this is really best done, I believe, at the local and county level, as each community has their specific set of circumstances. We know how different northern Wisconsin communities can be and are from southern ones. All right. So one example of just moving forward that I've seen happen is in the city of Eau Claire. They've been really working for several years on creating new elements to their comprehensive plan. They have a focus on sustainability, their downtown. They most recently made an action plan focused on renewable energy. Another good example in northern Wisconsin is Bayfield. I've seen this little city of Bechle will do all sorts of innovative, interesting things as well. So part of getting on with it includes alternative energy. Wisconsin is seeing many large solar farm proposals and quite a few in the construction phase. But communities can also put in community solar arrays and microgrids for helping communities ensure more reliable energy, especially in extreme events. One example of moving ahead, and I'm sorry, this is not from northern Wisconsin, but I think it does apply, is in Milwaukee, their metropolitan sewerage district. They have quite an innovative approach to managing water within their region. They use a lot of green infrastructure focus, which is kind of a combination between an ecological and an engineering approach, and aims to manage water as much on site as possible. So these photos just show examples where MMSD is working with local governments and private households as well. They also have a green seams program, which is focused on land protection in its natural state. So I had mentioned wetland restoration, for example. So I think some of these programs are probably could be adapted in other places. Part of what we do when we are thinking about community plans is doing an inventory of place, in particular understanding vulnerabilities to climate change. This means not only understanding who is vulnerable, but where is vulnerable. And so then the two factors together can help to focus where and what kinds of resources need to be brought to bear. All right, so that's for the most part where WICCI is moving and the community sustainability group, but I did want to introduce you to this resource that we've been developing in extension. It's a community climate resilience menu. We just published it in late 2021. It is a curated set of resources addressing agriculture and food systems, the built and natural environment, and energy efficiency and renewables. We see this particular tool as ever-changing and dynamic, so it'll constantly be updated. The menu is also organized in a menu format and includes equity and environmental justice, education and information, low-cost strategies, significant resource deployment, and then grants and funding. And I believe that is all I have. Here are a couple of wiki resources and others. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay now?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. My microphone cut out for a minute there. All right, I want to say a big thank you to all of our speakers for today. And I'm looking at the Q&A box. I don't see any questions there right now, but please feel free to enter any questions for any of our speakers. We will be posting a recording of this presentation on the Minnesota Sea Grant website. And then also in just a minute, I'll share a link if you have not already done so and would like to sign up for the GovDelivery emails and the Sea Grant webpage to get notifications about upcoming Twin Ports climate conversations. And then for those of you who do attend these regularly, we're switching things up a little bit. We're going to be, instead of having monthly Twin Ports climate conversations, we're going to move to having these be quarterly. One reason for that is in response to the survey that many of you may have taken several months ago, where we were hoping to offer a little bit more interactive and more in-depth content. So stay tuned for notifications for the next Twin Ports climate conversation, which I believe will be sometime in July. Still not seeing questions. So I guess I have a question. This could be for any of you all. This report is extensive. I mean, just a lot of work has gone into it. And, given COVID, a lot of what we're all doing is virtual, but are there any planned in-person trainings or workshops or anything for different groups to engage with this?
I know that Adam and I, and probably Natalie, we've all been doing webinars. And as far as I know, there aren't any trainings face-to-face in the works.
Yeah, I think it's also tough because all the working groups are kind of going in their own directions. Like, we're starting to have these conversations now about next steps. And I think there's probably is potential for some in-person activities coming up. Like Anna said, most of our outreach right now are webinars and presentations, but I know with our with the tourism and outdoor recreation working group, we're thinking about potential ways of engaging with business owners or folks in the industry. And I could definitely see some of that happening more in person. I guess as an overall kind of scope of plan for Wiki, we're thinking that maybe another update will come in the next 5 years. So now groups are really starting to strategize now about what to do next. And it could be a lot of different things, but if folks are interested in engaging with different working groups or with folks who are chairing these working groups, I encourage you to reach out. A lot of these conversations are happening right now, like I said a few times now, but I think there is opportunity now to think about different directions and new directions. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
Thanks. And you actually answered my next question, which was how often do these get updated? So about every 5 years or so. And then finally, I've always loved the stories page on Wiki. I really encourage folks to go visit that if you have not done so already. Are there ways in which people can engage with those if they have an idea for a climate story or something where they would like to become involved with that component of it? Is there a contact person or a point person for that?
I'm not on the web page, but there should be contact information. Even if it's general to write, there's a coordinating group and they meet regularly. And so I'm sure they're looking at those sorts of things as people, are contacting them about whatever it happens to be, the stories, if there's a broken link or what have you.
Right, I'm still not seeing any questions. So I guess we can give folks back about 11 minutes in their day. So thank you so much for attending. Again, this will be posted on the Minnesota Sea Grant webpage probably in a couple of weeks. And please feel free to shoot any of us on the planning team a message if you have any ideas or thoughts about future Twin Ports climate conversations. Thanks again to all of our panelists for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.